right, everyone, thank you for coming. We are talking about the new listing agreement. Can everybody hear me okay? Can I get a thumbs up or
I can hear you.
Madison, can you give me a thumbs up if you can hear me, or Sarah?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, perfect. So Sadie is helping me as usual. So if you're on Zoom and you have questions, let me know. So this class I really put together and it's, I don't want to say it's a little all over the place. But a lot of the listing side of things is getting used to some phrasing, okay? So it's very important that you stay away from certain buzzwords. And I know some of you are really not going to like this. But phrases and words you cannot say when talking to a seller regarding compensation, industry standard, typical, required, normal. You cannot say any of these things when you're talking about commission. You cannot say, if you don't offer an SOC, no one will show your home. And just for the record, these are not Shy Bundy rules. These are what the attorneys are saying. You can say things like, my fee is X, or I charge X, okay? Now, if it were me, I would use the comparable properties, okay? Mr. and Mrs. Seller, this home is a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 1,400 square feet on this size of a lot, this year built, and they are offering a compensation of, I'm just gonna say $25,000, you know, since we're all in the room together. And it sold in 4 days, X amount over list price. So you can incorporate the conversation of SOCs in when you're using the comparable properties. This is not a Shy Bundy thing. This is attorney thing. The attorneys are recommending or suggesting that we talk about SOCs, so selling office compensation, as an incentive. To say something along the lines of, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, when a buyer is looking for a home, they have 3 cash requirements. They have a down payment, they have closing costs, and whatever commission that they agreed upon with their buyer broker. If it were me, I would always have a buyer representation agreement, a Form 41, on my listing presentations. Because I want my sellers to know about this new law and what these buyers were expected to sign when they started their home buying process. So seller, if a buyer has these 3 cash requirements, what would you like to offer as an incentive to a buyer broker / buyer to purchase your property? This was an attorney suggestion. I'm not saying I love that. I don't really love the phrasing of an incentive to buy your property, but you can get very creative with it as long as you stay away from the buzzwords. Any questions so far? All right. So let's jump into the listing agreement, okay? So paragraph 2 is the expiration of the listing, okay? So seller hereby grants to listing firm the exclusive right to list and sell the property from the date of mutual acceptance of this agreement. So I'm gonna pause for a minute. Whenever we hear the words mutual accepted, we usually think of a purchase and sale agreement. Well, they are now referring to mutual acceptance in the terms of seller and listing broker. Until midnight of whatever the expiration date is of the listing, okay, the listing term. So if we're gonna go on the market January 31st and my listing expires June 31st, you would put in June 31st. And then the same verbiage as the old form. If this agreement expires while seller is a party to a purchase and sale agreement for the property, the listing term shall automatically extend until the sale, excuse me, is closed or the purchase and sale agreement is terminated. Moving on to paragraph 3. Pamphlet. Seller acknowledges receipt of pamphlet entitled Real Estate Brokerage in Washington. Bless you. Sorry. Just to be clear, just as it is with working with a buyer, there's a process. With a buyer, you have to give the real estate brokerage in Washington pamphlet. Okay, that's the new agency law brochure. Before you sign a Form 41, which is before you have a contract. So with the seller, you have to give the real estate brokerage in Washington to the seller, and then you have the listing agreement signed, okay? That process is very important. Paragraph 3B. Listing firm appoints broker's name, insert your name, to represent the seller. This agreement creates an agency relationship with the listing broker and any firm's managing brokers who supervise the listing broker during the listing term. No other brokers affiliated with the firm are agents of the seller. I find it a bit ironic and fun, bless you, that sometimes we say broker and sometimes we say agents. So that's interesting to me. Listing broker as limited dual agent, okay? Just like on the buyer representation agreement, the seller has to give specific permission for you to act as a limited dual agent, okay? I know in our world, when we see a line with an initial spot, we always have our client sign it, okay? I want to be clear, that's not the case when it comes to limited dual agent. You can always do a Form 18, which is an amendment to the listing agreement. That's the form I forgot. Let me go get it. Can you print that out?
Absolutely.
Sorry, I lost my train of thought. You can always use a Form 18 to amend the limited dual agent. Whether you're gonna add it or agree upon it now or agree upon it later. Now, if you're one of these brokers that has your own belief system of not wanting to do be a limited dual agent, you would not have the seller sign this, okay? Firm limited dual agency. if a property is sold to a buyer represented by one firm's broker other than the listing broker, seller consents to any supervising broker who also supervises listing firm's broker acting as a limited dual agent. What this means is in the event that Susie, the seller's broker, is the listing agent here in our office, and Bob is the buyer broker here in our office, I am now dual. So that's always been, that's nothing new, but now it's just very clearly stated. Paragraph number 5 is the list date. This is what day will you go on the market? Now, something that is new about this is the old verbiage would say you have to go on the market within 30 days of this contract. Now you have 90 days. So firms shall submit this listing, including the property information on the attached listing input and photographs of the property to be published by MLS on said date, which date shall not be more than 90 days from the effective date. Seller acknowledges that the exposure of the property to the open market through MLS will increase the likelihood that seller will receive fair market value for the property. Accordingly, prior to the list date, firm and seller shall not promote or advertise the property in any manner whatsoever. Okay, I need you all to hear that. You are not allowed to advertise the property prior to it going on the market. Including but not limited to yard or other signs, flyers, websites, email, text, social media, mailers, magazines, newspapers, open houses, preview showings, or tours. Seller shall not materially interfere with listing firms' marketing of property. To address any privacy or similar concerns, seller may instruct listing broker to limit marketing by not displaying the property address or map location on the internet, by eliminating any and all internet advertising, and by imposing specific showing instructions and other similar restrictions. Okay? So this paragraph is pretty loaded. Has your list date. You have to go on the market within 90 days of having this contract signed. It is abundantly clear you are not to advertise a property in any way, shape, or form prior to going live on the market. This is a finable offense from the MLS, and I had a broker who had never ever done anything wrong, fined, I believe it was $3,000. 1,500 of it was suspended, and she had to pay 1,500. So be careful.
Hey, Shy,
Yes.
it's Harry. Hey, it looks like they don't have any talk about the lockbox. Sometimes, you go there and put the lockbox on early. Is that okay? Before, I think it's no, but it looks like here they don't have to talk about lockbox.
We're gonna get to that in paragraph 8.
Oh, okay.
And basically, Harry, back to your question, the bottom line is you can't visibly do anything to the property that will show that it's going to be going on the market. And it's kind of a challenge, even not your for sale sign, but you're not even supposed to have the yard arm go up. Because then everybody knows it's coming on the market. Now, we've all seen it happen, and it's only a problem if it's a problem. So if you put your key box on the night before, you're probably going to be okay because it's less visible. But don't put your for sale sign up a day early. That's a huge. Okay. Fair housing. Okay. This has not changed in any way, But I always do love to, in the market that we're going into, I like to give my sellers a warning about fair housing with love letters, okay? This is just a friendly reminder that if sellers are reading love letters and we are in a multiple offers, market, we're gonna go into more of a multiple offer market. The seller needs to understand fair housing isn't just discriminating on gender or sexual orientation or race or you could discriminate on somebody with a familial status. So if the seller has two letters and they're like, "Ooh, I want to sell to these people because they're a family and we raised our family here." Well, that's fair housing violation. So I tell my sellers, hey, I'll give you the love letters, but I want to talk about them with you. Because I don't want you to violate anything on accident. So that's a really good example of how to review that paragraph. All right, the big doozy, paragraph 7, compensation. Seller acknowledges that there are no standard compensation rates. And the compensation in this agreement is fully negotiable and not set by law. If during the listing term, the seller sells the property and the sale closes, or the sale fails to close due to seller's breach of the terms of the purchase and sale agreement, seller shall pay commission as follows. So 7A1 is just your flat percentage or flat fee for your standard old LOC. So your listing office commission. A2 is in the event the buyer is unrepresented. So if the buyer is not represented by a buyer brokerage firm, the listing firm compensation shall be blank. So this is filled out wrong all the time. So, hey seller, my fee of what I charge is $25,000. Now, in the event I secure a buyer that is currently not represented, and I'm not representing them, I'm not dual, but they're choosing to purchase unrepresented, my fee now would be $50,000. Where people get a little fumbled on this is they might say $25,000 because they're thinking my fee as the listing broker is $25,000. And if the buyer's unrepresented, now my fee is $25,000. No. Because if a buyer is unrepresented, there is not an SOC. There is only an LOC. So it's the total commission of your LOC and whatever you charge for the unrepresented buyer. Questions? So just to be clear, if my fee is $25,000 under 7A1, I would put $25,000. And if the buyer is unrepresented, my fee is now $50,000. It's the total amount. All right, 7B. This is for the buyer brokerage firm commission. B1 is your regular old SOC. It is a percentage or a flat fee to a cooperating member of the MLS representing the buyer, which includes another broker affiliated with listing firm who represents the buyer. That's just a regular old SOC. B2 is for dual. If listing broker represents both seller and the buyer as a limited dual agent, blank percent of the sales price or blank flat fee. equal to the amount in subsection B1 if not filled in. So if you're in a dual situation, you have an LOC and you still have an SOC, you still have two types of commissions. If the buyer's unrepresented, you only have one type of commission. Okay, if you only have one kind of commission, compensation, you would cross out buyer broker's information on the purchase and sale agreement and cross out line 17 with the commission being paid as offered, because there's no buyer broker. Okay. B3. If checked, the offer to pay the buyer brokerage firm compensation shall extend to a licensed brokerage firm that are not a member of the MLS. This is very, very uncommon in our area because our MLS is so huge. But I know in Yakima, it's a little bit more of a thing. So that's something you could talk to your seller about, but I would not spend much time on it because we're a huge MLS. So I don't ever come across people that aren't members of our MLS. B4. Buyer brokerage firm compensation shall be paid as set forth above, unless modified by the buyer and buyer brokerage firm in a mutually accepted purchase and sale agreement. The offered amount may not be withdrawn or reduced with respect to a buyer after that buyer or buyer brokerage firm has notified the listing firm or seller of the buyer's intent to submit an offer, and for 3 calendar days after. Buyer brokerage firm is an intended third-party beneficiary of this agreement. Holy cannoli, that's a mouthful. Basically, if I'm a listing broker and Michelle calls me and says, hey, we're writing an offer tomorrow, I can't go in and reduce the SOC. Okay, not a common practice, but can't do it. 5, is seller acknowledges that offering compensation to the buyer brokerage firm is not required. So they say that a few times. Okay. Expiration of listing term, and this is your tail clause. If seller shall, within 180 days, if not filled in, after the expiration of the listing term, sell the property to any person whose attention it was brought through the signs, advertising, or other actions of the listing firm, or on information secured directly or indirectly from or through firm during the listing term, seller will pay firm and buyer brokerage firm the above compensation at closing. Provided that if seller pays compensation to another licensed brokerage firm in conjunction with the sale, the amount of compensation payable to firm shall be reduced by the amount paid to such other listing firm, and the compensation payable to buyer brokerage firm shall be reduced by the amount paid to such other buyer brokerage firm. They got real legal eagle with these forms. Like, it's a mouthful. The bottom line is if your seller sells their property within 180 days of the expiration of your listing agreement, and that buyer was somehow, you brought this home to their attention through your advertising, your sign, your website, seller could potentially have to pay you a commission. Bless you. However, if seller paid another broker the commission, they don't have to pay it twice, but they would have to pay you the difference. So if my fee is 20,000 and another listing broker comes along and their fee was only 15,000, I could maybe get 10,000 from the seller. 7D. Now I have, let me read it and then I'll go into my spiel. Cancellation without legal cause. If seller cancels this agreement without legal cause, seller may be liable for damages incurred by the firm as a result of such cancellation, regardless of whether seller pays compensation to another licensed brokerage firm. So if they cancel your listing, they would potentially have to pay for any damages such as out-of-pocket expenses. I have a few brokers that have asked over the last few months, can we come up with verbiage to say, hey, seller, you would owe me this in the event that you cancel? It's pretty black and white right here. Now, I would definitely stay in alignment with your integrity. If you're gonna try to get a seller to reimburse you for damages or costs, you should have receipts. If for whatever reason, you feel like you wanna give them a list of your standard expenses, you can do that as well. Additional consent. Seller consent to firm receiving compensation from more than one party and to sharing of compensation between firms, provided that any terms and amount offered to or by firm are disclosed as required by an RCW. The bottom line to all this is it is the ultimate transparency. Compensation isn't required. There is no standard compensation. There is no law about compensation. This is what I charge for compensation. This is what compensation is if the buyer is unrepresented. This is what compensation is if the buyer is represented. This is what compensation is if I'm a limited dual broker. And if I receive compensation for anything else, I must disclose it to my client. So it is just ultimate transparency. Property access and key box. Listing firm shall install a key box on the property that holds a key to the property, which may be opened by an electronic key held by members of MLS. They're brokers and affiliate appraisers of the MLS. Unless otherwise agreed in writing or set forth in the attached listing input sheet, firm and other members of the MLS shall be entitled to show the property at all reasonable times. So Harry, I don't think this answered your question about putting the key box on prior to going on the market. Correct?
Correct. Well,
Well, then I'm going back-
I assume that you probably should not, but I'm just saying a lot of times, you go a few days before, set everything up, you just pop that up there, so you don't have to come back next day, that's all.
Yeah, no, and I fully agree with you. I think, so going back to paragraph 5, when it lists all the things you can't do,
Mhm.
it says including but not limited to.
Correct.
So my interpretation is anything you do to the property that's visible, that it will be for sale prior to going on the market, is a rule violation.
Hmm.
If it goes on the night before, I highly doubt you're gonna have an issue. But you can't, there'd be no reason to put it on the week before because no one would be accessing the property. Paragraph 8A, this is property access for non-member brokers. This is for people that are not a part of our MLS. Again, a rarity, but you need to fill out how it is you work. So moving forward, I'm not going to go through each of these paragraphs because there were not changes in these paragraphs. So multiple listing service remains the same. Property condition and insurance. Seller warranties and representations. Short sale, no distressed home conveyance. Seller disclosure statement. Closing, these all remain the same. 15. Damages in the event of a buyer's breach. In the event the seller retains the earnest money as liquidated damages on a buyer's breach, any costs advanced by or committed by firm on seller's behalf shall be paid therefrom, and the balance shall be, you need to check a box, retained by seller or divided equally between seller and firm. And retained by seller is the default. So if seller is awarded $10,000 of earnest money, and maybe listing broker fronted some money for something, maybe some repairs for the inspection or something along those lines. Seller's agreeing that out of that earnest money, listing broker or firm would be reimbursed right off the bat. And then what happens to the balance of the earnest money? Does the seller keep it, or is it split between the seller and the firm? And then attorney fees. And then this is where seller's signature and listing broker information.
Hey, Shy,
Yes.
so what do you recommend for if there's earnest money left behind by the buyers? Should we, I would check divide it equally between sellers and firm. That's what it was before.
Well, that is how it was before, and I think, I don't think there's a right or wrong answer on this. I think it's however you conduct your business.
Okay.
So, I think you have to have a really good explanation though, and I think a really good explanation is, hey seller, it's very uncommon that a buyer loses their earnest money, but in the event that they do, or the transaction closes, part of my agreement is I split the earnest money with you for all the work that I have done on this transaction before we go back on the market and start back from square one. So I think you need a reason behind why you would be awarded any of the earnest money.
Yep.
All right, and this is my fault. I forgot to give Sadie a form, okay? So, oh, she's so awesome. She's just gonna pull it up for me. So we are gonna be going over Form 18, which even prior to all of the new laws and the changes, Form 18 has always been an amendment to the listing agreement. Similar to a Form 34 is an amendment to the purchase and sale. It used to be a lot more blank, but now it has some other features that might make things a bit easier. So paragraph 1, this is a really great way to extend your listing term. Now, in real estate, there are oftentimes multiple ways to do things. So many of us old timers would use a Form 19 to extend the listing. Well, now you can use a Form 18. Many of us use a Form 19 to adjust the price. You can use a Form 18. So both work. Agency and co-listing broker. This is a big one. So firm appoints blank to represent seller with listing broker. This agreement creates an agency relationship with a co-listing broker and any firm's managing brokers who supervises co-listing broker. No other broker affiliated with firm are agent of seller. So you're going to need this paragraph if you have a team. I would have this attached to my listing agreement. So if anybody's name is on co-listing broker, you just have this filled out when the seller signs the original agreement. Or in the event I go out of town and Michelle is gonna watch my business. I would need to get this amended to add Michelle so she could work with my sellers. Limited dual agency, okay, so this is the same paragraph that's on the buyer representation agreement. This is the same paragraph that's on the listing agreement. So if the seller and you did not consent to you being a limited dual agent at the initial appointment, and you go on the market and lo and behold, you meet a buyer at an open house, or maybe one of your buyers becomes a good fit for this house. You would go to your seller and be like, hey seller, I wasn't planning on being a limited dual agent, but I found a great buyer. Sign this. But you must do the same thing with the buyer. Okay? Buyer and seller both have to initial a special section granting you permission to be a limited dual broker. For B, if you have a co-listing broker as a limited dual. So what this means is, let's say I'm a team leader and I always put Bob the broker as my co-list to help me with phone calls and all of that fun stuff. And Bob does my open house on my teams. And all of a sudden Bob meets a buyer at the open house. And now Bob is going to represent the buyer. Now I know you brilliant and creative brokers are like, oh, I'll just remove Bob from the listing agreement and he'll just go represent the buyer and nobody's a dual limited broker. Nope, that does not fly. Okay? Everybody got that?
Do you only do that if they make mutual acceptance?
Well, they have to get permission
Whatever.
prior.
Oh, prior.
Yes. So the seller has to agree beforehand if they're comfortable. I mean, I know I am a spirited person, but I would never, as a seller, want my broker to be limited dual. So you have to decide how you want to run this with your business. And then other. If you need to change any of the terms of the listing or information on the listing, you can use other. Okay? All right, now we are going to jump to Form 41C. So 41C is going to be used when a buyer broker needs to modify the commission or the compensation that is paid to the buyer from the seller. Now, the reason I'm going over it in this class, because I know we're talking about listings, is if you are a listing broker, you better know what this form says when you receive an offer. Because it could really make a big difference in the net amount to the seller. So paragraph 1 is if there is 0 SOC, okay? So if I'm a buyer broker and I have my Form 41 filled out, my buyer representation agreement, my buyer representation agreement already spells out in the event the offered compensation is less than or more than, okay? So that's already agreed upon between buyer and buyer broker. But now buyer is making an offer. And I need to make sure the compensation is all in alignment. So if I have to modify, if my compensation is different than paid as offered, buyer broker needs this form. Listing broker, seller's broker needs to know how to interpret this form with their offer. So paragraph 1 is buyer brokerage firm compensation, no compensation offered by seller. So this is in the event the SOC is 0, or maybe it's off market. So there is no offer of compensation from seller to buyer brokerage firm in the listing, or seller has not signed a listing agreement. Seller shall pay the buyer brokerage firm a compensation of X% or a flat fee dollar amount. So in the event there is no SOC offered because it's off market or the SOC is 0. Paragraph 2. Additional buyer brokerage firm compensation, buyer brokerage service agreement. So paragraph 2 is if you are negotiating for more commission. So as a buyer broker, my fee is $25,000 and the seller is only offering to pay $20,000. My buyer and I already agreed that I could negotiate the difference. So I'm going to use this form to try to negotiate the SOC from $20,000 to $25,000. Buyer is obligated to pay buyer brokerage firm compensation as a condition of a buyer brokerage service agreement between buyer brokerage firm and buyer. Seller's offer of compensation to buyer brokerage firm in the listing is less than buyer's obligation to buyer brokerage firm. Accordingly, seller agrees to pay buyer brokerage firm an additional $5,000, so it's a percentage or a flat fee. So the first blank lines are the margin. My fee is $25,000, sellers are offering 20, so I'm asking for additional compensation of $5,000. Buyer brokerage firm total commission paid by the seller would be $25,000. So your first set of percentage or flat fee is going to be the margin of difference. The second set of either percentage or flat fee is going to be the total commission. Paragraph 3 is credited to buyer. Maybe my fee is $25,000 as a buyer broker, and the seller is offering $30,000. Now again, buyer broker and buyer have already figured out what to do with this margin of more compensation. So buyer brokerage firm compensation shall be reduced from the amount offered in the listing by X amount, and seller shall credit the amount to buyer's obligation at closing. If buyer is obtaining a loan or loans to purchase the property, seller's credit to buyer is subject to buyer's lender approval of such credit. Any amount not approved by buyer's lender shall be paid to buyer brokerage firm. Buyer brokerage firm total commission shall be X at closing, not including any credit amount not approved by buyer's lender. So, seller is offering $30,000 and my fee is only $25,000. So I'm going to put in here that the seller needs to reduce my compensation and credit the buyer the $5,000 difference. But if the lender does not allow for the buyer to receive a $5,000 credit, then buyer broker gets that money back. From a practicality standpoint on this, This could hurt your buyer's negotiation. Now, in the market that we're walking into, buyers aren't gonna be able to negotiate, so I'm not too worried about it. But remember, if you're telling the seller up front to reduce the commission and credit it to the buyer, and the buyer's asking for something else, the seller's gonna know, oh, wait a minute, they're already getting this amount from the commission. So you could credit the buyer in a different way on the commission disbursement. But depending on your relationship with the buyer, it's not as black and white as this one is. That is an agreement between you two. And you have to make sure your paperwork and your buyer representation agreement are in alignment. That's very important. And last is to reduce the SOC and the remainder is credited back to the seller. Again, this is agreed upon between buyer and buyer broker in the Form 41. But buyer brokerage firm compensation shall be reduced from the amount offered in the listing by X percentage or flat fee. Buyer brokerage firm's total compensation shall be Y percentage or flat fee. So my fee is 25,000. Seller's offering 30,000. And buyer and I already agreed that if there's an overage amount, they want me to credit it back to the seller as part of negotiation. Okay? Any questions? I've been a broker a long time, and these forms are real legal. A 42C. I'm just gonna start this with don't shoot the messenger. If you receive any additional compensation, you have to disclose it. Well, what do you mean? How would I receive more compensation? So I'm the listing broker, okay? My fee is 30,000. And I choose not to be a limited dual agent, or my sellers aren't comfortable with it. And a buyer calls me from my open house or my website. And they're like, oh, I'm unrepresented, but I really want a broker. And I'm like, well, I can't be dual. So I'm going to refer you to this fantastic broker named Michelle. And Michelle, I'm going to charge you a referral fee of $10,000. I have to disclose to the seller that I'm getting additional funds.
Yeah. Sorry.
Another time you would need to disclose is if Michelle has a listing and it says any full price offers made by January 18th receive a $3,000 compensation bonus. I have to say, hey buyer, just so you're aware, to be fully transparent, I will be receiving $3,000 of compensation because this was their advertisement and we met this criteria. So the 42C is a disclosure. A 41C is modification of compensation. Okay? All right, look at me 8 minutes early. Questions? Anybody? All right, so I have a question for you guys, if we could all just jump in and speak freely. I am thinking about in February, doing some presentation sessions listing presentation and buyer presentation. And basically saying, here are all the things you should have, and here are all the things that are optional. And helping you fine tune your presentation, almost like we did in new broker training, but using what you have and what you already do, and really just bringing it up to date. And then if you so choose, come back and do your presentation, listen to other people's presentations. I think now more than ever before, it is imperative to have an up-to-date, refreshed listing presentation and buyer presentation. You need to practice these forms. You need to practice articulating it. And honestly, on Monday, I went to a listing presentation in Woodinville, and they are interviewing everybody and their brother. And this made me stand out. I slowed down and talked so much about the new laws and the compensation and what are expected of buyers. And here's a buyer rep, and they're like, we interviewed, I think 4 other brokers at that time, and nobody had brought it up. So is that something anybody would be interested in, to do some presentation sessions? Or do you guys feel like you're
I highly
dialed in on your
support that idea.
presentations?
I like it.
Sarah's in, all right, Madison's in. Tina's in, all right. Harry's gonna give the class.
Yeah, I'll be in, I'll be watching. I'll be-
Kylie, awesome, all right, we'll get those set up on the February calendar. So look out for that. Is there any other questions? All right, so we will go back to doing buyers again next week. It's gonna be the same buyers class I did last week. And then the one at the end of the month is more just like a general Q&A type of thing. So if you guys need anything in the meantime, Michelle and I are here. We'd love to help. And I hope you guys are all staying dry and warm with this crazy weather. So thank you so much for coming.